The sound of the projector humming was the only thing I could hear, louder even than the beating of my own heart, which felt like a trapped bird slamming against my ribcage. 300 guests sat in the dim, golden light of the hotel ballroom, their faces turned upward toward the massive white screen behind the head table. My husband, Mark, sat next to me, his hand resting on my knee, a touch that felt heavy, possessive, and entirely performative. He was smiling that charming, perfect smile that had fooled me for 7 years, the one he used to sell real estate and to sell me on the idea that we were happy. We were supposed to be watching a montage of childhood memories for his sister Emily's wedding, a sweet slideshow of pigtails and braces. But the screen flickered blue for a terrifying second, and then the image stabilized. It wasn't a baby picture. It was a grainy, slightly shaking video shot from behind a stack of yoga mats. The audio cracked through the high-end speakers, crisp and undeniable. A woman's giggle, breathless and sharp. Then, a voice that every person in this room knew better than their own prayers. Mark's voice. God, you're so much tighter than her. She's let herself go, you know? The gasp that tore through the room wasn't collective. It was a domino effect of shock. I saw Mark's mother drop her champagne flute, the crystals shattering with a sound that seemed miles away. I felt Mark's hand on my knee turn into a claw, his fingernails digging into my skin through the silk of my dress. He froze, his face draining of blood until he looked like a wax figure melting under the heat of his own sins. My personal trainer. I didn't look at the screen. I looked at him. I took a sip of my water, the ice cubes clinking softly, the only calm sound in a room that was rapidly descending into chaos. I watched the terror flood his eyes as he realized there was no pause button, no explanation, no way to charm his way out of this one. But wait, before you see him crumble, before you see the ruin of a prominent family on what was supposed to be their crowning day, you have to understand why I didn't just scream. You have to understand why I was the one who pressed play. You need to know how a woman who loved her husband with every fiber of her being ended up hiding behind a gym partition with a smartphone, holding her breath while her world shattered. Let me take you back to the beginning of the end. Let me tell you about the request that started it all. It was a Tuesday evening, raining, the kind of gray, relentless rain that makes the house feel like an island. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a stew Mark liked, trying to time it perfectly for when he walked through the door. I remember the smell of onions and damp earth. When the front door opened, the air pressure in the house changed. It always did with Mark. He brought a storm in with him, an energy that demanded attention. I wiped my hands on my apron, a nervous habit I'd developed over the last 2 years, and walked out to greet him. He was shaking off his umbrella, looking handsome in his charcoal suit, but his eyes were critical as they swept over the hallway, checking for dust, checking for order, before finally landing on me. There was no warmth in that gaze. It was an appraisal. "Hey," I said, leaning in for a kiss. He offered me his cheek, cold and wet from the rain. "Smells heavy in here," he muttered, loosening his tie as he walked past me into the kitchen. "Is that the beef stew again?" "It's your favorite," I said, my voice shrinking a little. I tried to keep the smile plastered on my face. I wanted tonight to be nice. Mark leaned against the marble island, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked at the pot bubbling on the stove, then back at me. His eyes drifted down my body, pausing at my hips, then my waist. It wasn't a look of desire. It was the look a mechanic gives a car that's been totaled. "We need to talk about Emily's wedding," he said, his voice smooth, professional. "Oh, yes," I said, brightening up. "I picked up the fabric swatches yesterday." The bridesmaids are wearing. I don't care about the swatches, Sarah, he interrupted, cutting me off with a sharp wave of his hand. He sighed, a sound of profound disappointment that made my stomach drop. I'm talking about how we're going to look, how you are going to look. I froze, the wooden spoon in my hand dripping gravy onto the pristine counter. What do you mean? Mark walked over to me. He stood close, invading my personal space, not to embrace me, but to intimidate. He reached out and pinched the fabric of my blouse right at my waist, grabbing the soft flesh underneath. This, he said softly, disgust lacing his tone, this has to go. I pulled back as if burned, tears instantly stinging the back of my eyes. I'm a size 10, Mark. I'm healthy. You're soft, he corrected, his voice hardening. And Emily is having a black tie wedding. Everyone is going to be there. My partners, the investors, the whole family. I can't have you walking in there looking like you've given up. Given up? I whispered, the hurt blooming in my chest like a bruise. I work full-time. I take care of this house. I take care of you. And you're 32 years old, Sarah, he snapped, turning away to pour himself a drink. You're not 20 anymore. Metabolism slows down. I get it, but I'm not going to stand next to a wife who looks like a frumpy housewife while my sister looks like a model. It reflects poorly on me, but says I can't maintain my standards. I stood there, paralyzed. The cruelty wasn't just in the words. It was in the casual way he delivered them, as if he were discussing an overgrown hedge in the garden that needed trimming. He didn't see me as a person with feelings. He saw me as an accessory that had gone out of style. I want you to lose 20 pounds before the wedding, he said, taking a sip of his scotch. That gives you 3 months. 20 pounds? That's a lot in 3 months, I stammered. Not if you're disciplined, he countered, his eyes flashing. I spoke to a trainer today at that exclusive gym downtown, the one where the celebrities go. Her name is Chloe. She's the best. I already paid for the package. You already paid? I asked, feeling a wave of humiliation wash over me. You discussed my weight with a stranger before you discussed it with me? I'm solving the problem, Sarah. That's what I do. I solve problems. He set his glass down hard on the counter. You start Monday, 6 a.m. Don't embarrass me. He walked out of the kitchen then, taking his drink to the study and closing the door, leaving me alone with the bubbling stew and the sound of the rain lashing against the windows. I looked down at my body, the body that had carried us through financial stress, the body that had comforted him when his father died, the body he used to worship. Now it was just a problem to be solved. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and angry. I should have thrown the stew at the wall. I should have packed a bag right then and there, but I didn't. I was trapped in the cycle of trying to be good enough for a man whose standards were a moving target. I wiped my face, I turned off the stove. And I told myself I would do it. I would lose the weight. I would make his jaw drop. I would make him love me again. That was the mistake, thinking his love was something I could earn back with a calorie deficit. The first month was hell. I woke up every morning in the pitch black of 5 a.m., my body screaming for rest. I drove to the gym in the cold pre-dawn mist, my stomach growling because I was only allowed a green juice. The gym was a temple of glass and chrome, filled with beautiful, hard bodies that made me feel like an intruder. And there was Chloe. Chloe was everything I wasn't. She was 24, blonde, with muscles that looked like they were carved from marble, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She wore spandex that looked like a second skin. "Come on, Sarah, pick it up," she would yell, clapping her hands as I struggled on the treadmill, sweat pouring into my eyes. "Mark says you really need to tone those thighs. We don't want any jiggle in the photos." She dropped his name constantly. "Mark says, Mark wants." It was as if she knew him intimately, knew his preferences better than I did. "Your husband is very concerned about your health," she said one morning while stretching her hamstrings with impossible flexibility. "He's such a devoted man. You're lucky. Most men wouldn't pay this much to help their wives get back in shape." Lucky. The word tasted like bile. I was on the floor, doing planks until my abdominal muscles felt like they were tearing, and she was telling me I was lucky to have a husband who was ashamed of me. "I'm doing this for him," I gasped out, my arms shaking violently. "Well, good," she said, checking her reflection in the mirror and fixing a stray hair, "because he deserves the best." I worked harder. I starved myself. I ate lettuce leaves and boiled chicken until I lost the taste for food entirely. I came home exhausted, my muscles aching, only to find Mark scrutinizing me. He would ask, "Did you hit your macros?" He would touch my waist, his fingers feeling like calipers measuring a piece of livestock. "Getting there," he would say, void of affection. "Still a bit soft around the middle. Keep pushing." I was disappearing, literally and metaphorically. I lost 10 pounds, then 12. My clothes started to hang off me. My face became gaunt. My friends told me I looked tired, that I didn't look like myself. But Mark just nodded, satisfied, but never happy. It was never enough. It was a Thursday, 2 weeks before the wedding. The deadline was looming. I had lost 18 pounds. 2 to go. I decided to surprise him. I had left my water bottle at the gym the night before, a special, expensive one he had bought me, and I knew he would be furious if I lost it. I left work early, driving to the gym in the middle of the afternoon. The place was usually quiet at 2 p.m. I walked in, swiping my card. The front desk was empty. The main floor was deserted, just the hum of the air conditioning and the faint sound of pop music playing over the speakers. I headed toward the locker rooms, but then I heard a sound coming from the private training studio, the VIP room with the frosted glass where they did the expensive one-on-one sessions. It was a laugh. Mark's laugh. I stopped dead in my tracks. Mark was supposed to be at a closing across town. He had told me specifically not to call him because he would be in negotiations all afternoon. My heart did a strange flutter, a mix of confusion and a sudden cold dread. Maybe he was here to surprise me? Maybe he was checking on my progress with Chloe? I crept closer. The door was slightly ajar, just a crack. The frosted glass obscured everything, turning the figures inside into blurry shadows, but the voices were clear. "So, is she actually losing it?" Mark's voice, lazy, relaxed. Chloe giggled. "She's trying so hard, babe. It's actually kind of sad. She was shaking so much during squats yesterday, I thought she was going to collapse." "Good," Mark said. His tone was cruel, a sound I had never heard him use with anyone else, yet it felt familiar, like the undercurrent of our entire marriage finally breaking the surface. She needs to suffer a bit. Maybe it'll teach her to take care of herself. I shouldn't be listening. I should turn around. But my feet were nailed to the rubber floor. My hands were trembling. "She's never going to look like you, though," Mark continued. The sound of movement, fabric rustling. "You're distinct." "You're bad," Chloe purred. "You're making your wife starve herself while you're here doing this." "I'm helping her," he scoffed. "She was letting herself go. I just gave her a project. Keeps her busy so I can get away to see you." The air left my lungs. It wasn't just about the wait. It was a distraction. A cruel, elaborate game to keep me occupied, to make me feel inadequate so I wouldn't notice he was slipping away. He had weaponized my own insecurities to cover his affair. I moved to the gap in the door. I had to see. I had to know for sure. I peered through the sliver of space. They were on the massage table in the corner of the room. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. She wasn't wearing much of anything. He was looking at her with a hunger he hadn't shown me in years. I reached into my purse. My hand found my phone. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just acted on instinct, a survival mechanism kicking in. I lifted the phone, the camera lens finding the gap. I pressed record. I stood there for 4 minutes. 4 minutes of them mocking me. 4 minutes of them laughing at how easy I was to manipulate. 4 minutes of the sounds of their betrayal. I didn't cry. Not then. The tears were frozen inside me, turned into jagged shards of ice. I stopped the recording. I lowered the phone. I backed away, step by silent step, until I was back in the hallway. I turned and walked out of the gym, past the empty front desk, out into the blinding afternoon sun. I sat in my car and screamed, a silent scream that tore my throat raw. I looked at the phone in my hand. I had the evidence. I could confront him tonight. I could throw his clothes on the lawn. But then I thought about the wedding. I thought about his mother, who constantly made snide comments about my cooking. I thought about his sister Emily, who had accidentally left me out of the bachelorette party email chain. And I thought about his father, the patriarch, who prided himself on family honor above all else. And I thought about Mark's ego, his precious, fragile reputation. Confronting him at home would be a fight. He would gaslight me. He would say it was a one-time thing. He would blame me. It would be my word against his spin. No, private justice wasn't enough for a public humiliation like this. He wanted me to be wedding ready. He wanted me to make an impression. I wiped my eyes. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My face was thin, my eyes hollow, but there was a fire in them now that hadn't been there before. "Okay, Mark," I whispered to the empty car. I drove home. I cooked dinner. When he came home that night, smelling faintly of shower gel and guilt, I smiled. I kissed him. I told him I had a great workout. I told him I was so excited for the wedding. I played the part of the oblivious, doting wife perfectly. I played it for 2 whole weeks. And now, here we are. The ballroom is silent, save for the heavy breathing on the speakers. The video is still playing. The part where he says my name with a sneer is echoing off the vaulted ceilings. I turn to him now. His face is a mask of horror. He looks at me, and for the first time in our marriage, he is the one who is small. He is the one who is afraid. "Happy wedding, everyone," I whisper, standing up. My dress, the one I starved myself to fit into, hangs perfectly on my frame. I smooth the silk over my hips. I don't look at the guests. I don't look at his weeping mother. I just look at him. "I think I lost the weight you wanted, Mark," I say, my voice calm, carrying through the stunned silence. I pick up my purse. I turn my back on him, on the screen, on the wreckage of the life I thought I wanted. I start walking toward the exit, the sound of my heels clicking on the parquet floor like the ticking of a clock that has finally run out of time. And as I push open the heavy double doors, leaving the chaos behind me, I finally take a full, deep breath. I'm hungry. I think I'm going to go get a burger. The heavy oak doors swung shut behind me, muting the uproar of the ballroom to a dull, underwater roar. The silence of the hotel lobby was jarring, pristine and cold, contrasting violently with the firestorm I had just ignited. I didn't stop. My heels, the ones Mark insisted made my calves look acceptable, clicked rhythmically against the polished marble, a steady beat of departure. I felt lightheaded, not just from the months of starvation, but from the sheer, terrifying weightlessness of freedom. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip my clutch, but my spine was steel. I walked past the stunned concierge, whose jaw was practically unhinged, likely having heard the audio of my husband's infidelity echoing even out here. "Sarah!" The voice came from behind me, desperate and furious. I didn't turn. I knew that voice. It was the voice that had told me I was unlovable, the voice that had critiqued my body, the voice that had just been broadcast moaning another woman's name. I pushed through the revolving glass doors and into the humid night air. The valet was there, looking bored, unaware that the dynasty inside was crumbling. "My car, please," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "The silver Lexus." Mark burst through the doors, stumbling slightly. He looked deranged. His tie was askew, his face a mottled mask of red rage and pale panic. He ran down the steps, grabbing my arm with a force that made me wince. I ripped my arm away, the movement sharp and violent. "Don't you dare touch me," I hissed, turning to face him. Under the harsh yellow light of the hotel portico, he looked small. The charismatic real estate mogul was gone. In his place stood a terrified boy caught with his hand in the jar. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? My investors were in there. My mother is hyperventilating." "I didn't destroy anything, Mark," I said, feeling a strange, icy calm settle over me. "I just turned on a projector. You destroyed your life. You destroyed us. It was a mistake." He was pleading now, switching tactics, trying to find the angle that would work, the button to push. "Sarah, baby, listen to me. We can fix this. We can spin it. Tell them it was a deepfake. Tell them it was a joke. I'll buy you the lake house." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound that felt like it scraped my throat. "You think starving me for 3 months was a joke? You think sleeping with the woman you paid to torture me was a joke? I lost 20 pounds, Mark. I lost them for you." "I was stressed," he yelled, throwing his hands up. "You let yourself go, Sarah. You stopped trying." The sting of his words didn't hurt anymore. It was like watching a snake strike at a pane of glass. "I worked 60 hours a week to support your vision when you started your company," I said quietly, stepping closer to him until I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath, the same scotch he drank while telling me I was fat. "I nursed your mother through hip surgery when your sister couldn't be bothered. I cooked your meals. I ironed your shirts." The hotel doors opened again, and this time it wasn't just staff. It was Eleanor, Mark's mother, supported by Emily, the bride. Emily was crying, her mascara running down her cheeks, her perfect day ruined. But Eleanor looked ready to kill. She marched down the stairs, her expensive cane clicking aggressively against the pavement. "Eleanor!" shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "On my daughter's wedding day! Have you no shame?" I looked at the woman I had tried so desperately to please for 7 years. The woman whose recipes I had memorized, whose insults I had swallowed with a smile. "Your son humiliated you, Eleanor," I said, my voice projecting clearly in the night air. "He humiliated me every day for the last 2 years." Eleanor spat, stepping closer, her perfume cloying and thick, choking me. "We took you in. We gave you a life. And this is how you repay us? By airing dirty laundry? You will leave this family with nothing." Mark stepped between us, trying to regain control. Mom, stop. Sarah, get in the car. We are going home and we are going to talk about this rationally. You are having a breakdown. That's what we'll tell them. A mental breakdown from the diet. He reached for me again, his eyes pleading with me to accept the lie, to step back into the cage he had built. He truly believed he could fix this. He thought I was still the woman who would apologize for burning the toast. He thought he could gaslight me one last time. The valet pulled my car up, the engine purring softly. It was the only sound in the tense standoff. "I'm not going home, Mark," I said, walking around him. "I'm going to a hotel. My lawyer will call you on Monday." I paused, hand on the door handle, looking back at the matriarch who was shaking with impotent rage. "You might want to check the family trust. Mark's been dipping into it to pay for Chloe's apartment. It's all on the rest of the recording." Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her throat, turning to look at her son with horror. Mark's face went white, the blood draining away completely. He whispered, the fight finally leaving him. I got into the car. The leather seat felt cool against my back. I slammed the door, shutting out his voice, shutting out the sight of Emily sobbing, shutting out the ruins of the fake life I had maintained for so long. I put the car in gear and drove away. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I knew what was back there, a fire burning, and for the first time, I wasn't the one being consumed by the flames. I drove aimlessly for 20 minutes, the adrenaline slowly seeping out of my veins, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I was crying now, silent tears that tracked through the makeup I had applied so carefully 4 hours ago. I wasn't crying for Mark. I was crying for the Sarah who had chopped vegetables in fear. I was crying for the time I had wasted. But beneath the grief, there was something else, a gnawing, physical sensation that demanded attention. My stomach growled, a loud, ferocious protest. I saw the neon sign of a 24-hour diner ahead. It wasn't the kind of place Mark would ever step foot in. It was greasy, bright, and real. I pulled into the parking lot, surrounded by trucks and worn-out sedans. I walked inside. The bell above the door chimed cheerfully. The diner was mostly empty, just a few truckers at the counter and a couple of teenagers in a booth. The smell hit me instantly. Frying onions, bacon, old coffee. To anyone else, it might have smelled stale. To me, it smelled like heaven. I sat down in a red vinyl booth near the window. The plastic stuck slightly to the back of my silk designer dress. I must have looked insane. A woman in a $2,000 evening gown, diamonds glinting in the fluorescent light, face streaked with tears, sitting alone in a roadside diner at 9 p.m. A waitress, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and tired feet, walked over with a pot of coffee. Her name tag said Brenda. She looked at me, took in the dress, the tears, the ring I was twisting on my finger. She didn't ask. She just poured a mug of steaming black coffee and set it down. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice raspy like sandpaper and honey. I looked up at her and let out a watery laugh. "You could say that," she asked, eyeing the white of my dress, though it was technically champagne. "No," I said, shaking my head, "my husband's sister's." Brenda let out a low whistle. "Well, damn." "He did," I whispered. Brenda asked, pulling out her pad. I looked at the menu. Pictures of greasy burgers, piles of fries, milkshakes with whipped cream towering over the glass. Mark's voice echoed in my head. "You're soft. Carbs are poison. Just a salad, Sarah." I looked Brenda in the eye. "I want the double cheeseburger," I said, my voice getting stronger, "with bacon and the large fries." "You got it," she smiled. "And a milkshake," I added. When the food arrived, it looked beautiful. Grease glistened on the patty. The fries were a mountain of gold. I picked up the burger. My hands were still trembling slightly. I took the first bite. The flavor exploded in my mouth. Salt, fat, meat, cheese. It was overwhelming. It was the taste of rebellion. It was the taste of autonomy. I closed my eyes and chewed slowly, savoring every calorie, every forbidden gram of fat. For 3 months, I had been hungry, not just for food, but for affection, for respect, for dignity. I ate the whole thing. I ate until my stomach felt tight, a sensation Mark had told me to fear, but which now felt like comfort. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Mark, then another, then a call, then a text from Emily. "How could you? Mom is calling the police. Please pick up." I looked at the screen, the notifications piling up like wreckage. I took a sip of the thick, cold chocolate milkshake. I pressed the side button on my phone and held it down. The screen went black. I was alone in a diner, wearing a ruined dress, my marriage over, my future uncertain. I had no idea where I was going to sleep tonight. I had no idea what my bank account would look like in the morning. But for the first time in years, I was full. The bell above the door chimed again. I didn't look up, focused on swirling a fry in the cheese sauce, but the heavy footsteps stopped right at my table. I felt a shadow fall over the booth. I looked up. Standing there was a man I recognized from the wedding, not one of Mark's slick business partners. It was David, Emily's fiancé's brother. The black sheep of that family, the one Mark always sneered at because he worked as a contractor and drove a truck. He was still in his suit, though the tie was undone, hanging loose around his neck. He looked tired, but his eyes were kind. I swallowed the bite of food. "I think my fan club is currently burning down the Ritz-Carlton, David." He chuckled, a warm, low sound, and slid into the booth opposite me. He placed a familiar-looking object on the table, my wrap. "You left this on the back of your chair," David said softly, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the Formica tabletop. I stared at the silk wrap. Seeing it there, folded neatly by his large, rough hands, made a fresh lump form in my throat. I hadn't even realized I was shivering until he draped it over my shoulders. The warmth was instant, but it was his proximity that startled me. He smelled of cedar and rain, not the cloying cologne Mark bathed in. "Did they send you?" I asked, my voice trembling as I pulled the wrap tighter. "Did they send you?" David signaled Brenda for a coffee, then looked at me. His eyes were dark, framed by laugh lines that Mark would have Botoxed away years ago. There was no judgment in them, only a profound, weary sadness. "Nobody sent me," he said, taking a sip from the mug Brenda placed in front of him. "And, honestly?" I blinked, a tear escaping and tracking through the grease of the burger on my lip. I wiped it away with a napkin, feeling ungraceful and messy. "You saw it?" "Hard to miss when it's projected on a 20-foot screen in 4K resolution," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "The audio was particularly crisp. The part about the trust fund, that was the nail in the coffin, Sarah. You didn't just drop a bomb." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Eleanor told me I was ruining the family. "Eleanor is a viper," David said flatly. He picked up a sugar packet and turned it over in his fingers. "She's been covering for Mark since we were kids. He breaks a toy, she buys him 2 more. He crashes a car, she bribes the cops." Hearing him say it, hearing a man, a member of that family, acknowledge my reality, broke something open inside me. It wasn't the hysterical sobbing of earlier. It was a deep, aching release. I put the half-eaten burger down. My appetite vanished, replaced by a wave of exhaustion so heavy I felt like I might slide under the table. "He starved me," I whispered, the confession spilling out to this near stranger. "For 3 months. He checked the grocery receipts. He made me weigh myself in front of him every Friday morning. If the number hadn't gone down, he would look at me with this disappointment, like I was a failed investment. And I did it." David reached across the table. His hand hovered for a second before covering mine. His palm was warm, calloused, rough against my skin. It was a grounding weight. "You are perfect, Sarah," he said intensely. "And the fact that you did that to yourself for a man who doesn't have half your heart, that's the tragedy, not the wedding." I asked, feeling a pang of guilt. "I shouldn't have done it on her day." David snorted. "Emily, 5 minutes after you left, she was screaming at the caterers because the shrimp were getting cold. She's more worried about how this will look on Instagram than the fact that her brother is a sociopath. Don't waste your tears on them." He squeezed my hand gently and then pulled back as Brenda returned with a slice of cherry pie. She set it down in front of him, but he slid it toward me. "Eat," he commanded gently. "Sugar, real sugar." I took a forkful. The sweet, tart cherries were a shock to my system. I ate another bite, then another. "What?" I asked between bites. David leaned back, crossing his arms. "Well, Mark tried to chase you, but his investors cornered him. Apparently, moral turpitude clauses are a thing in his contracts. He was trying to explain that it was a personal matter while his mother was faking a heart attack on the floor. The paramedics came. She made a miraculous recovery when they tried to cut her dress open to attach the leads." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that bubbled up from my chest. "And then," David continued, his face growing serious, "Mark started blaming you. He told everyone you were mentally unstable, that you doctored the video, that you've been hallucinating from hunger. He's spinning a narrative, Sarah." The laughter died in my throat. The cold reality of Mark's resources washed over me. "I can't fight him, David. He has money. He has lawyers." "You have the truth," David said firmly, "and you have the video. Don't you dare delete that. Make copies. Send it to the cloud. Send it to me." The question hung in the air, fragile and terrifying. "I can't go home. He has the keys. It's his house." David looked out the window at the parking lot, his jaw tightening. "You're not going back to that house. Not tonight. He's likely there now, drinking and breaking things." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a set of keys. Not car keys, but a simple brass key on a ring. "I have a place," he said. "It's not a mansion. It's a renovated barn on the edge of town, about 20 miles from here. It's quiet. Mark doesn't come there. He thinks it's a dump. There's a guest loft. It has a lock." I looked at the key, then at him. A week ago, the idea of going to a second location with my brother-in-law would have been unthinkable, scandalous. But the rules of my old life had burned up in the atmosphere about an hour ago. I asked. "You humiliated the people who have been hurting me my whole life, too," David said quietly. "Mark has always been the golden boy. I was the mistake, the laborer, the disappointment. I watched how he treated you, Sarah, at Christmas, at birthdays, the little digs, the way he'd talk over you. I wanted to say something 100 times, but I knew you wouldn't hear it." He stood up, throwing a $20 bill on the table. "Come on. You can follow my truck. If you don't feel comfortable, you can keep driving, but the offer stands." I stood up, my legs feeling shaky but functional. I gathered my purse, clutching the phone that contained the evidence of my liberation. I looked at David, really looked at him. He wasn't wearing a tailored Italian suit. His jacket was off the rack, his shirt slightly wrinkled. But he stood solid, like a tree that had weathered storms the rest of them would have shattered under. "Okay," I said softly. We walked out into the cool night air. The neon sign of Joe's Diner buzzed overhead, a flickering beacon in the darkness. I walked to my Lexus, the car Mark had leased because it matched his image, and David walked to a battered, black pickup truck. As I started the engine, my phone lit up again. Another text from Mark. "Pick up the phone. You are making a mistake. We can fix this." "I love you." I stared at the words. "I love you." He had said those words when he proposed. He had said them when I cooked a perfect dinner. He had said them when I lost the first 10 pounds. They were currency to him, counterfeit bills he printed whenever he needed to buy my compliance. I looked up through the windshield. David's truck was waiting at the exit of the parking lot, his brake lights glowing steady red. He hadn't moved. He was waiting to make sure I was following. He was waiting for me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a project. I didn't feel like an accessory. I felt like a human being in trouble, and someone had thrown me a line. I deleted Mark's text. I didn't block him, not yet. I needed to see what he would do, but I put the phone face down on the passenger seat. I shifted the car into drive and pulled out behind the black truck. As we drove onto the highway, putting distance between me and the wedding, between me and the starvation, between me and the woman I used to be, I rolled down the window. The wind whipped my hair, tangling the perfectly styled waves, and for the first time in 3 months, the air didn't smell like hunger. It smelled like rain on asphalt. It smelled like the beginning of something new. And God, that burger had been good. The drive to the outskirts of town felt like a journey between two different worlds. The city lights, the imposing hotel, and the manicured streets where Mark built his empire faded into the rearview mirror, replaced by winding roads flanked by dense, shadowy trees. I kept my eyes fixed on the red taillights of David's truck ahead of me. They were steady and constant, a tether keeping me from drifting off into the abyss of my own panic. The rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, drumming a rhythm against the roof of the silver Lexus that sounded like 1,000 tiny fingers tapping for attention. We turned onto a gravel driveway. The stones crunched loudly under the tires, a raw, organic sound that felt miles away from the silent, paved driveways of the gated community I had fled. The headlights swept across a structure that Mark had always dismissed with a sneer, but as I pulled up and parked beside the battered truck, I didn't see a shack. I saw a renovated barn, built of dark, weathered wood that seemed to have grown out of the earth itself. Warm, yellow light spilled from the windows, cutting through the gloom and the rain. It looked like a fortress. It looked like a home. I turned off the engine. The silence that rushed in was deafening. My hands were shaking again, not from hunger this time, but from the sudden crash of adrenaline. I was really here. I was at my brother-in-law's house, wearing a dress worth more than my father's car, while my husband was likely destroying every shred of my existence back in the city. David was at my door before I could unbuckle my seatbelt. He opened it, holding a large black umbrella over the opening, shielding me from the downpour. "Watch your step," he said, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "It gets muddy out here." I swung my legs out, wincing as my heels sank slightly into the wet earth. I grabbed his extended hand. It was rough, warm, and solid. He didn't pull me. He just offered support, letting me find my own balance. It was such a small thing, but after years of Mark grabbing my arm to steer me, to position me for photos, to control me, David's gentle grip made my chest ache. We ran the few steps to the porch, the heavy wooden planks echoing under our feet. David shook out the umbrella and unlocked the heavy oak door, pushing it open to reveal a living space that smelled of cedar, old books, and wood smoke. "Come in," he said, ushering me inside. "Sorry, it's—" I stepped onto a thick woven rug and looked around. The space was open, with high raftered ceilings and a massive stone fireplace that dominated one wall. There was no white leather furniture, no glass tables with sharp corners, no abstract art that cost a fortune but made you feel nothing. Instead, there was a worn leather armchair that looked shaped by years of reading, bookshelves overflowing with hardcovers, and a sturdy wooden table that looked like it had been built by hand. It wasn't sterile, it was alive. "It's beautiful, David," I whispered, shivering as the dampness of the night clung to my bare skin. "I'll get a fire going," he said, moving quickly. He didn't look at me like I was a broken doll. He just went to work, stacking logs in the grate with efficient, practiced movements. "There's a bathroom through that door on the left. There are clean towels. And, Sarah, there's a bathroom hanging on the hook. It's huge, but it's clean. You might want to get out of that dress." I looked down at the champagne silk, now splattered with mud at the hem. It was a cage designed to show off a body that Mark claimed ownership of. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice thick. I retreated into the bathroom. It was simple, tiled in slate, with a pedestal sink. I caught my reflection in the mirror and gasped. My mascara had held up surprisingly well, but my eyes were wild, haunted. My collarbones protruded sharply, a testament to the months of starvation. I looked fragile. I looked like a woman who had been hollowed out. I reached behind me and unzipped the dress. It slid to the floor in a puddle of expensive fabric. I kicked it away, stepping out of it with a revulsion that surprised me. I washed my face, scrubbing away the makeup, the foundation, the false facade. When I put on David's bathrobe, it swallowed me whole. It was made of thick, blue terry cloth and smelled like laundry detergent and pine. I cinched the belt tight, feeling swallowed up in warmth. When I walked back out, the fire was roaring, casting dancing shadows against the walls. The electric lights were off, leaving only the glow of the flames and a single lamp by the armchair. David was in the kitchen area, the kettle whistling. "Tea," he said, pouring boiling water into 2 mugs. "Chamomile." I sat on the edge of the sofa, curling my legs underneath me. He brought the mug over and set it on the coaster, then sat in the armchair opposite me, keeping a respectful distance. He had taken off his suit jacket and tie, rolling up the sleeves of his white shirt. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deepened by the night's events, but he seemed at peace in a way Mark never was. "I checked my phone," I said, staring into the dark liquid in my mug. The steam warmed my face. David nodded slowly, not surprised. He moves fast when his ego is bruised. He wants to cut off your resources. "He also sent an email," I continued, my voice trembling. "He said he's going to sue me for defamation. He said the video was filmed at a private space, and I violated his rights." "Let them call," David said, his voice low and hard. "You filmed him in a gym, a semi-public space, and regardless, the truth is a powerful defense." I lifted my eyes to meet his. "He is trying to scare you," David said firmly. "That is his only weapon right now, fear. He knows he lost the room tonight. He saw the way people looked at him. He's terrified, and a terrified narcissist is dangerous, but he is also predictable." "I am weak," I whispered, a tear sliding down my cheek. "I have $11 in my wallet, David. I have no job. I quit the design firm 2 years ago because Mark said it was embarrassing for his wife to work." "You are not weak," David said, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "Weak people don't walk into a wedding and expose a dynasty." Weak people don't survive 3 months of psychological torture. You are a survivor, Sarah. And as for a job, you're a brilliant graphic designer. I remember your portfolio. I blinked, surprised he remembered. Mark had never looked at my sketches. I can help you, David said. I know people. Not in Mark's circle. Real people. My phone buzzed again on the coffee table. It vibrated aggressively against the wood. The screen lit up with Eleanor's name. You ungrateful wretch. We made you. You will be on the street by morning. I have called the police to report the car stolen. Bring it back immediately. I read the message out loud, my voice shaking. David stood up, his face darkening with a flash of anger I hadn't seen before. He walked over to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked Lexus. Okay, he said, turning back to me. If they want to play that way, we play. I asked, confused. Give me the keys to the Lexus, David said. I'll drive it back to the hotel right now. I'll leave it with the valet. I'll take a cab back. David, you can't. I stood up, the robe bunching around my feet. It's pouring. And Mark. Mark isn't going to do anything to me, David said with a grim smile. He knows I'm the one person in the family who knows where all the bodies are buried. He won't touch me. He walked over and gently took the keys from my hand. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone. I asked, tears streaming freely now. David paused at the door, his hand on the latch. He looked back at me, his eyes soft in the firelight. Because I remember the Thanksgiving 3 years ago, he said quietly. When Eleanor made fun of my job in front of everyone and Mark laughed. You didn't laugh. You went into the kitchen and made me a plate of leftovers because I was too angry to eat at the table. You sat with me on the back porch while I smoked, and you asked me about carpentry. You treated me like I mattered. He opened the door and stepped out into the rain. The door clicked shut. I turned the deadbolt, the sound echoing in the empty room. I watched through the window as he got into the silver Lexus. The taillights flared red, then faded down the driveway, leaving me alone in the house. I sank back onto the sofa, pulling the heavy wool blanket over my knees. The house was quiet, save for the crackling of the fire and the rain on the roof. I looked around at the shadows, expecting to feel afraid. I was alone in the woods, my marriage was over, my in-laws were hunting me, and I had nothing. But as I took a sip of the chamomile tea, I realized something strange. My stomach wasn't knotting in anxiety. My heart wasn't racing with the need to please someone. The silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for instructions. I wasn't waiting to be told if I looked okay, if I had said the right thing, if I was enough. I was just me. I curled up on the sofa, listening to the fire. I thought about the burger. I thought about the look on Mark's face when the screen lit up. I thought about David driving into the storm to protect me. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Mark. I'm coming to the house. I know you're not there, but I'm going to burn your paintings, every single one of them, unless you answer me. I stared at the screen. My paintings, the ones I kept in the spare room closet, the watercolors of the lake, the sketches of the city, the only things that were truly mine. A sharp pain sliced through my chest. He knew exactly where to hurt me. He knew those paintings were my soul, the only part of myself I had managed to hide from his criticism. I typed a response, my fingers trembling. Burn them. Paint is cheap. My freedom isn't. I hit send. Then I turned off the phone completely. I tossed it onto the cushion beside me. I lay my head back, closing my eyes. I could imagine the flames consuming the paper, the colors curling and turning to ash. It hurt. It hurt terribly. But as the tears leaked from my eyes, hot and fast, I realized that he could burn the paper, But he couldn't burn the talent. He couldn't burn the vision. He couldn't burn the woman who had made them. I fell asleep on the sofa before David returned, the exhaustion finally claiming me, dragging me down into a dark, dreamless place where no one was screaming my name. I woke with a start. The room was dim, the fire reduced to glowing embers. A blanket had been tucked carefully around my shoulders, a different one, softer. I sat up, disoriented, my heart hammering. For a split second, I thought I was back in the marital bed, terrified that I had overslept for my morning weigh-in. Then I saw the wooden beams. I smelled the cedar. "Easy," a voice said from the kitchen. David was there, leaning against the counter, holding a mug of coffee. He was back. His hair was damp, and he looked exhausted, but he was safe. "Did you?" I croaked, my voice raspy from crying. "Parked it right in the portico," David said, walking over. Gave the keys to the concierge, told him Mrs. Reynolds had a sudden illness, and I was returning her car. Eleanor was in the lobby, screaming at the manager about the champagne bill. She saw me. She'd tried to block my path, started screaming that I was an accomplice. He smirked slightly, handing me the coffee. I took the coffee, wrapping my hands around a warmth. "Thank you, David." "Drink your coffee," he said gently. "We need to figure out a plan, because Mark isn't going to stop. He's going to escalate. He called my phone 3 times on the drive back." I felt a cold spike of fear. He guessed. David pulled out a chair and sat facing me. "He said he's coming here, Sarah." I set the coffee down, the liquid splashing over the rim. "He can't take me back." "I know," David said, his voice steel. "But he can make a scene. He can try to force you into a hold if he has a doctor on his payroll sign the papers." I asked, looking at the door as if expecting it to burst open any second. "We leave," David said simply. "Pack a bag, whatever fits in a backpack. We're going to my cabin up north. It's 4 hours away, off the grid. No cell service, just woods and water. Let him come here with his lawyers and his cops." I looked at this man, this black sheep who was risking everything for me. Then I looked down at my hands. The diamond ring was still on my finger, a heavy, glittering lie. I pulled it off. It was tight. My fingers were swollen from the salty food, but it came loose. I held it up, watching it catch the dying light of the fire. "I don't have anything to pack," I said, placing the ring on the wooden table with a sharp click. "Good," David said, standing up and extending a hand to help me up. "Then you have nothing to carry." I took his hand. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the storm was far from over. I was a fugitive in my own life, running from the man who promised to love me, with the brother he despised. It was messy. It was terrifying. But as I walked toward the door, leaving the diamond ring sitting alone on the table, I felt lighter than I had in 7 years. "Let's go," I said. The heavy oak door of the barn clicked shut, sealing the warmth inside. But as I climbed into the passenger seat of David's truck, I realized the real warmth wasn't in the building. It was sitting right next to me. The cab of the truck smelled of sawdust, peppermint gum, and old coffee, a stark, gritty contrast to the sterile, leather-scented air of Mark's luxury sedan. That car had always smelled like a showroom, like something no one was allowed to touch. This truck smelled like work. It smelled like life. David turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life with a coarse vibration that I could feel through the soles of my feet. He didn't look at me immediately. He was adjusting the heat vents, turning them specifically toward me. It was such a mundane gesture, something so small, yet it made my throat tighten. Mark would have complained about me being cold, telling me I should have worn a jacket, making my discomfort an inconvenience to him. David just fixed it. We rolled down the gravel driveway, the headlights cutting through the pitch-black darkness of the countryside. As the barn faded behind us, a strange panic fluttered in my chest, not because I was leaving, but because I was leaving without the identity I had worn for 7 years. I felt naked without the weight of that ring on my finger. My hand felt light, phantom-like, resting on my lap. "Are you warm enough?" David asked, his voice low, blending with the hum of the tires on the wet asphalt. He kept his eyes on the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. I could tell he was angry, not at me, but for me. The tension in his jaw was a roadmap of the years he had spent watching his brother belittle me. "I'm okay," I lied softly. Then I corrected myself. "I'm cold, but I'm okay." He nodded, reaching over to turn the fan speed up 1 notch. We didn't speak for the first 20 miles. The silence wasn't empty, though. It was filled with the things we were both leaving behind. I watched the raindrops race across the window glass, distorting the passing streetlights into long, weeping streaks of light. I thought about the wedding reception. By now, the shock would have worn off. The whispers would be turning into shouts. Eleanor was probably demanding the hotel staff confiscate phones, trying to scrub the internet of her son's infidelity, but she would fail. The truth has a way of staining things permanently. I thought about the video, the way Mark looked at the trainer, the way he laughed. That laugh had haunted me for months, mostly because I hadn't heard it directed at me in years. He had looked happy. Cruel, but happy, and all while I was measuring out almonds and crying over a scale in the bathroom. My stomach growled, a loud, undeniable protest in the quiet cab. I flinched, instinctively bringing a hand to my stomach, shame flooding my face. Old habits die hard. Mark would have looked at me with disgust. He would have raised an eyebrow and asked if I had no self-control. David didn't flinch. He didn't look away from the road. He just reached into the center console without a word, pulled out a granola bar, and held it out to me. "Eat," he said. I stared at the wrapper. It was peanut butter and chocolate, forbidden food, poison, according to Mark. "I can't," I whispered, my voice trembling. "It's too many calories." David's hand didn't waver. He slowed the truck down slightly, glancing at me with a look of such profound sorrow that it broke my heart. "Sarah," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "Mark isn't here. The scale isn't here. You are starving. I watched you tonight. You look like you're fading away. Please, eat the damn bar." I took it. My fingers shook as I tore the wrapper. The sound seemed deafening in the cabin. I took a bite. The taste of chocolate and salt exploded on my tongue, so intense it made my eyes water. I chewed slowly, feeling the nourishment hit my empty stomach like a physical blow. I took another bite, then another, eating with a sudden, ferocious hunger that terrified me. I finished it in seconds. I started to cry. It wasn't a pretty, cinematic cry. It was ugly. I gasped for air, covering my face with my hands, sobbing for the woman I had been an hour ago, for the woman who was afraid of a granola bar. I sobbed for the years of apologies I had given for simply existing. David pulled the truck over onto the shoulder of the desolate highway. He put the hazard lights on, the rhythmic clicking acting like a metronome to my breakdown. He didn't try to hush me. He unbuckled his seatbelt and turned his body toward me, reaching out to wrap his large, rough hands around my shaking ones. "Let it out," he murmured. "Scream if you have to. You've been holding your breath for 7 years." "Why did I stay?" I choked out, looking at him through blurred eyes. "Why was I so weak, David? He made me hate myself. He made me think I was the problem. He told me I was unlovable if I wasn't a size 2. "You weren't weak," David said fiercely, squeezing my hands. "You were loyal. You were in love, and he weaponized that. Mark is a predator, Sarah. He finds the brightest light in the room and he tries to dim it because he can't stand that he doesn't shine like that. You didn't stay because you were weak. You stayed because you are good, and he isn't. I looked at this man, this brother, who had been painted as the failure, the disappointment. I saw the kindness in his eyes, a kindness that had survived despite growing up in the same house of horrors as Mark. "He's going to destroy me," I whispered. "He has the lawyers. He has the money. He's going to tell everyone I'm crazy." "Let him talk," David said, releasing my hands to wipe a tear from my cheek with his thumb. His skin was calloused, rough against my face, but his touch was incredibly gentle. "Let him spend his millions. You have something he doesn't have anymore." "What?" I asked. "You have the truth," David said, "and you have me. I'm not letting him near you." "We're going to the cabin. It's in the middle of nowhere. There's a wood stove, a stocked pantry, and zero reception. We're going to sit there, and you are going to sleep and eat and paint until you remember who you are." He shifted back into his seat and put the truck in drive. As we merged back onto the highway, a sense of safety began to settle over me, fragile but real. It felt like waking up from a long nightmare to find the sun just beginning to rise. We drove for hours. The city lights disappeared completely, replaced by the looming silhouettes of pine trees and the endless canopy of stars. The rain stopped, leaving the world washed clean. I dozed off intermittently, lulled by the heater and the steady presence of David beside me. Every time I woke up, he was there, alert, watching the road, a silent sentinel guarding my escape. Around 4 a.m., the truck began to climb. The road turned from asphalt to dirt, winding up a steep incline. The air that seeped through the vents grew colder, sharper, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. "We're almost there," David said softly. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. The headlights swept across a clearing. There, nestled against the backdrop of a dense forest, was a small log cabin. It wasn't grand. It had a slanted metal roof and a small porch with a rocking chair. It looked humble. It looked perfect. David parked the truck and killed the engine. The silence of the forest was absolute, heavy and peaceful. "Leave it," David said as I reached for my purse. I hesitated. My phone was my lifeline, but it was also my shackle. It was the portal through which Mark could reach me, hurt me, threaten me. "Leave it," he repeated. "You don't need to know what they're saying. Not tonight." I looked at the black screen. I knew that if I turned it on, I would see hundreds of messages. Hate from Eleanor, threats from Mark, maybe confusion from friends who didn't understand. But David was right. None of that mattered here. I opened the glove compartment of the truck and tossed the phone inside. It landed with a dull thud. I slammed the compartment shut. It felt like closing the lid on a coffin. We got out of the truck. The air was freezing, shocking my system, waking me up completely. I wrapped the oversized blue bathrobe tighter around myself, my bare legs shivering. David was at my side instantly, shrugging off his own jacket and draping it over my shoulders. It was heavy and warm, retaining his body heat. "Come on," he said. "I have to get the generator going, then we'll have lights." He unlocked the cabin door, and we stepped inside. It was freezing, the air stale from disuse, but as David moved around in the dark, flicking switches and striking matches, the space began to transform. A lantern flared to life, casting a warm, golden glow over rough-hewn log walls, a patchwork quilt on a sofa, and a small kitchen that looked like it had been used to cook real meals, not just protein shakes. He knelt before the wood stove, crumpling newspaper and stacking kindling. I watched his hands, capable, strong. He wasn't afraid of getting dirty. He wasn't afraid of work. Mark paid people to do everything for him, even live his life. David lived his own. The fire caught, snapping and popping, the orange light dancing across the room. The heat began to radiate outward, chasing away the chill. "There's a bedroom in the back," David said, standing up and brushing ash from his hands. "Fresh linens in the closet. You take it. I'll take the couch." "No," I said quickly. I didn't want to be alone in a room. The silence was still too new, too frightening. Can I stay out here, on the other couch? I don't want to be behind a door." David looked at me, understanding dawning in his eyes. He nodded. "Okay, we'll camp out here, closer to the fire anyway." He bustled around the kitchen, finding a can of tomato soup and some crackers. He heated the soup on a propane burner, the smell filling the cabin, rich, acidic, comforting. We sat on the floor in front of the fire, eating out of mugs with spoons that didn't match. "I'm 32 years old," I said, staring into the flames. "My life feels like it's over. I have to start from scratch." "Your life isn't over, Sarah," David said, dipping a cracker into his soup. "You're 32. You have decades ahead of you. And you're not starting from scratch. You're starting from experience. You know what you don't want now. You know what you deserve." I looked at him. "What do I deserve, David?" He held my gaze, the firelight reflecting in his dark eyes. "You deserve someone who looks at you when you speak. You deserve to eat a burger without apologizing. You deserve to be loved for the way your mind works, not the size of your waist. You deserve to be happy." Tears pricked my eyes again, but they were slower this time, less violent. "Thank you," I whispered, "for saving me." He didn't answer. He just reached out and took my hand again, holding it firmly. We sat there in silence as the fire burned down to embers, the storm of my life raging miles away to the south, while up here, in the quiet dark of the mountains, for the first time in a long time, I felt safe enough to close my eyes and just breathe. The next morning, I woke up to a stream of sunlight hitting my face. I was disoriented for a moment, panic rising as I realized I wasn't in my bed. But then I smelled coffee and bacon, real bacon. I sat up. I was on the couch under a pile of heavy quilts. David was in the kitchen, his back to me, standing at the stove. He was wearing a flannel shirt and jeans, looking like he belonged here, like he was part of the cabin itself. He turned, seeing me awake. "Morning," he said, a small, genuine smile touching his lips. "Sleep okay?" I stretched, feeling the stiffness in my muscles, the physical toll of the stress. "I slept," I said, realizing it was true. I hadn't had a nightmare. "I found some old sketchbooks in the back," he said, gesturing to the table, "and some charcoal pencils. Thought you might want to, get it out." I walked over to the table. There was a blank sketchbook, waiting. My hands itched. Mark had threatened to burn my art. He wanted to destroy my voice. I picked up the charcoal. The black dust coated my fingertips. It felt messy. It felt wonderful. I looked out the window. The forest was green and vibrant, alive in the morning light. I thought about Mark, probably screaming at a lawyer right now, miserable in his perfection. I thought about Eleanor, clutching her pearls and her reputation. They were prisoners of their own image. I looked back at David, who was putting a plate of eggs and bacon on the table for me. He wasn't asking for anything. He was just giving. I sat down and opened the book. I didn't draw the forest. I didn't draw the cabin. I drew a woman. She was standing in the rain, barefoot, holding a broken chain in one hand. She wasn't skinny. She looked strong. She looked like she had just survived a war. "I'm going to be okay," I said, more to myself than to him. David poured coffee into my mug. "I know," he said. I took a bite of the bacon. Grease, salt, fat. It tasted like freedom. I was 32 years old. I was homeless, divorced, and scandalized. But as I looked at the man who had driven through the night to save me and the blank page waiting for my story, I realized something. I had never been more beautiful than I was right now.